All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendis est. The Devil's Guide to Feminist Victimhood, written by Riker. Available now, links in description. Here's a thinking process. NIA1 analyze user input. NIN book title minus book title minus Actually, that looks like the prompt itself is cut off, or it's a few shot example. But the instruction says return only the next continuation text that belongs after the partial answer. Do not repeat, summarize, quote, or rewrite any earlier text. Continue mid-sentence if needed. Obey the original requested length, count exactly. If the partial answer already satisfies the original request, respond only with, you first encounter equity-centered snufflers, praxis in the footnotes of a university HR handbook, page 47, Appendix C, subsection Trauma-Informed Compliance Protocols, where it sits like a relic foaled to a medieval vassal, granted from above, binding on below, and signifying nothing a serf could meaningfully consent to. The phrase arrives pre-dressed in the bureaucratic sublime, smooth, polysyllabic, perfumed with therapeutic concern. It sounds like something a caring institution would do. That is the entire point. The phrase is designed to make obedience sound like compassion and dissent, sound like cruelty before a single argument has been exchanged. Strip the ecclesiastical vestments from the language, and the plain English translation is, do what the activist bureaucracy says, stop asking for definitions, and call your compliance kindness. The architecture is elegant in the way all traps are elegant. Equity-centered replaces equality before law with mandated outcome engineered by administrators who decide what counts as fair. Snufflers, a word that conjures soft therapeutic attentiveness, smuggles in the priestly function of the HR class. Only they can detect the harms, only they can name the remedies, and only they are exempt from the rules they enforce. Praxis lifts the whole contraption out of mere policy and into the realm of ideological obligation. It is not a guideline, it is a duty, a practice, a way of being. Stack the terms, and you get a machine that converts subjective discomfort into institutional authority, replaces evidence with feeling, and treats any request for a stable definition as evidence of the very harm the term was invented to prevent. Now ask the only question that matters. If this phrase cannot be defined in a way that binds the people enforcing it, cannot be falsified by any available evidence, and cannot be applied symmetrically to both sides of a dispute, then what exactly is it? It is not a policy, it is not a principle. It is a fogword wearing a compassion mask, and its institutional function is to give officials a moral vocabulary for discretionary control while making resistance look like abuse. The serpent does not begin with a sword. He begins with a definition. Lexicon entry. Equity-centered snufflers, praxis bureaucratic noun phrase. A soft official phrase that turns subjective discomfort into institutional authority. Woke definition. A trauma-informed, equity-centered practice of affirming lived experience while preventing harm. Plain English, do what the activist bureaucracy says. Stop asking for definitions and call obedience compassion. Institutional function. It gives officials a moral vocabulary for discretionary control. Common uses. Explaining why a standard should be suspended. Justifying speech control as care. Treating dissent as proof of harm. Questions that puncture it. What exactly does the term require? What evidence would show the term is being abused? Does the rule apply to the people enforcing it? Who gains authority if everyone accepts this word? Encyclopedia notes. Part of speech, bureaucratic noun phrase, short definition. A soft authoritarian management framework that converts subjective emotional discomfort into binding institutional authority, eliminating the need for evidence. Debate, or due process. Woke definition. A trauma-informed, equity-centered practice of affirming lived experience while preventing harm through community-guided accountability praxis. Read that again slowly. Notice how it sounds like care. Notice how it functions as a leash. Plain English translation. Do what the activist bureaucracy tells you. Stop asking for definitions. Call your obedience compassion or be named a danger. Etymology. Equity-centered. A compound borrowing equity, equality of outcome, dressed in the hand-me-down robes of justice and centered. The therapeutic insistence that all decisions orbit a single approved abstraction. Together, the demand that unequal rules be treated as moral necessities. Snufflers, the operative word, a synthesis of snuff, to extinguish, to suppress, to put out and snuffle, to root around sniffing for traces of offense, impropriety, or heresy. The snuffler does not argue, the snuffler detects. Like a truffle pig in a sensitivity training vest, the snuffler roots through speech, email, facial expression, and tone for any particle of dissident residue, then extinguishes it with a whispered recommendation to the appropriate committee. The word also carries the faint whiff of snuff in its older, darker sense, the snuffing of a flame, the smothering of a light. What light? The light of logos, definition, distinction, reason, the settled noun, praxis, borrowed from Marxist theory, where it means theory applied to action, revolution made concrete. Here it provides a radiculesque veneer for what is in practice HR with a theology degree. Institutional function. The phrase exists to give officials a moral vocabulary for discretionary control. It does not clarify. It authorizes when an administrator invokes equity-centered snuffler's praxis. She is not describing a policy. She is announcing that policy is no longer necessary, that her judgment is the policy, and that questioning her judgment is itself the harm the policy was designed to prevent. This is the serpent's oldest move. Redefine one word, and the whole garden falls. Hidden premises. Feelings override public evidence. If someone says they were harmed, they were harmed. To ask for evidence is to compound the harm. Safety means exemption from contradiction. Comfort and safety are fused. Intellectual challenge is reclassified as violence. Power is only dangerous when opponents have it. Institutional power wielded by activists is invisible by definition. Dissenters pointing at it are weaponizing discourse. The speaker is a victim until proven powerful, and being proven powerful proves guilt. This is a Kafka trap with a counseling certificate. Mercy has been inverted into control. What calls itself compassion functions as surveillance. The counselor's couch replaces the witness stand. Common institutional uses. Human resources. An employee files a complaint because a colleague cited a crime statistic during a meeting. The colleague is informed that equity-centered snuffler's praxis requires a restorative conversation, a proceeding with no charges, no evidence rules, no representation, and no appeal. He will be asked to reflect. He will be told his reflection is not sufficient. His job hangs on the quality of his contrition. University conduct boards. A student is reported for using the wrong pronoun in an email he did not write. The board does not investigate. It centers the lived experience of the reporter. The accused is offered educational outcomes, mandatory re-education sessions, or a transcript hold. He chooses the sessions. The board records this as a voluntary resolution. No fault was found. No hearing occurred. His record notes a community standards engagement. The machine eats quietly. K-12 education. A teacher informs parents that their son will be socially transitioned at school without their knowledge. When the parents object, the school cites equity-centered snuffler's praxis. The child's lived experience and safety supersede parental authority. The parents are told their concern is rooted in dominance culture. A family is severed by a phrase no one can define. Corporate DEI. A manager declines to include a land acknowledgement in a software release note. He is told his refusal causes harm to indigenous team members. There are no indigenous team members. This detail is called beside the point. The praxis has already spoken. The inversion audit, consider what this term inverts. Sacred good inverted into truth, lived experience, private revelation, justice outcome engineering, equity, compassion compliance enforcement, due process, restorative conversation, courage vulnerability, performed weakness. Fatherly protection control divided by NINS culture, speech harm, divided violence, evidence, lived experience, divided by impact. Each inversion is small. Each is fatal. One false definition at the root poisons law, family, school, medicine, and childhood. The sewage principle, a single corrupted term at first principle, contaminates the entire vessel. Socratic interrogation of the term. Ask these questions in this order and refuse to proceed until each is answered. What exactly does equity-centered require? Name the action, name the standard. If the answer is, it depends on context, the term has no public meaning and cannot govern anyone. What constitutes harm under this praxis? If harm includes feeling uncomfortable, then harm includes hearing any idea you dislike. A definition that swallows everything governs everything. Demand a limiting principle. Who holds the authority to determine when snuffling is warranted? If the answer is the affected community, define the community, define its borders. Define how one enters or exits it. If membership is unfalsifiable, the authority is unlimited. Does the rule apply symmetrically? If a conservative employee reports that a DEI slogan caused her distress, will the same praxis be invoked? If not, the rule is special pleading, not justice. What evidence would prove the term is being abused? If no such evidence exists, the term is an instrument of unchecked power wearing a halo. Who gains authority if everyone accepts this word? Follow the incentive. The administrator gains jurisdiction. The institution gains discretion. The dissent loses speech. The family loses the child. The man loses his livelihood without a hearing. Contradictions? The term claims to protect vulnerability while empowering unaccountable institutions. It condemns domination while demanding obedience. It invokes care while dismantling every procedural protection that actual care built over 8 centuries of Western law. It says we believe survivors. It does not say we believe evidence. But a system that believes accusation without evidence does not protect the vulnerable. It manufactures vulnerability because anyone at any time can be accused by anyone, and the accusation itself is the verdict. Field note, the term in action. Setting, a university department meeting, spring semester, fluorescent light, stale coffee, 27 faculty, 1 associate dean of belonging. Professor M. Tenured, statistics. Before we adopt this reporting framework, I'd like to see the definition of microaggression we're using. The current draft includes tone and body language. Those are subjective. How do we adjudicate a complaint based on a sigh? Associate D softly with practiced sorrow. I want to name that this question, while I'm sure it comes from a place of genuine concern, is itself causing distress for several members of our community right now. In the spirit of equity-centered snuffless praxis, I'm wondering if we can sit with that for a moment. Silence, Professor M. I'm asking a procedural question. Associate D, and I'm hearing that the need for procedures is being prioritized over the lived experience of harm in this room. That's a pattern. I want to hold space for naming that pattern. A junior colleague, untenured, quiet, frightened. I think what Professor M is asking is reasonable. Associate D&D turning warm, devastating. I appreciate your impulse to mediate. I also want to gently invite you to consider whether that impulse itself might reflect an internalized need to center dominant perspectives. We're going to take a 5-minute break. When we return, I'd like to move directly to a vote. Professor M says nothing further. The framework passes 24-1 with 2 abstentions. The definition of microaggression is never clarified. 2 months later, Professor M is reported for a harmful tone during office hours. The praxis has no definition. It does not need one. It never did. Counter definition. A fog word is a power claim wearing a care mask. Detonating question. If this term cannot be defined, cannot be falsified, and cannot be applied symmetrically, why should it govern anyone? Maxim. Define before you obey. A word that cannot hold still is a cage that locks from the outside. Debunking the term. What the word pretends to mean. The official definition delivered in the soft, round, warm handshake vocabulary of the modern bureaucracy reads thus: a trauma-informed, equity-centered practice of affirming lived experience while preventing harm through community-guided accountability praxis. Read it slowly. Notice how it glistens. Notice how every word reaches toward care, toward tenderness, toward the wounded. It sounds like a nurse. It functions like a gag. The phrase is engineered to produce a specific emotional response. The sensation that opposition is cruelty. Before a single argument has been made, before a single definition has been fixed, the term has already wrapped itself in the stolen halo of compassion. Who could oppose preventing harm? Who would argue against affirming a person's experience? Only a monster, surely. And there it is, the trap snapped shut before you knew there was a trap. The word practice suggests humility, a craft, a discipline, a thing refined over time. The word praxis borrows the prestige of revolutionary theory, implying that this is not mere policy, but the application of deep moral knowledge to the real world. Trauma-informed insulates the framework from critique. To question it is to risk re-traumatizing someone. Equity-centered smuggles in the entire contested apparatus of outcome equality while pretending it means fairness. Community-guided invokes a vague, collective authority that never has to show its credentials or face a vote. The sentence is a cathedral of soft wood. It looks like shelter. It is a cage, what the word actually does. Strip the halo and the mechanism appears. Equity-centered snufflers praxis converts subjective emotional discomfort into binding institutional authority, eliminating the need for evidence, debate, due process, or definition. It does not clarify, it authorizes. When an administrator invokes it, she is not describing a policy. She is announcing that policy is no longer necessary, that her judgment is the policy, and that questioning her judgment is itself the harm the policy was designed to prevent. This is the serpent's oldest move. The garden did not fall because the serpent argued. It fell because the serpent redefined one word, hath God said. The question was not a question. It was a wedge, an invitation to treat the settled noun as unstable, the clear command as negotiable, the known boundary as a suggestion open to interpretation by those with sufficient sensitivity to interpret it. Equity-centered snufflers. Praxis is that wedge, institutionalized, credentialed, and given a budget line. It operates through what may be called the inversion engine, the systematic reversal of sacred goods into their opposites. Sacred good inverted into truth, lived experience. Private revelation above public evidence. Justice outcome engineering. Equity dressed as fairness. Compassion compliance enforcement, due process, restorative conversation. Confession without charges, courage, vulnerability, performed weakness as moral currency. Fatherly protection, control. Any boundary recoded as domination, mercy indulgence, leniency toward approved groups. Severity toward dissenters, notice the pattern. Every good is turned against itself. Truth becomes narrative. Justice becomes favoritism, mercy becomes a weapon, compassion becomes surveillance. The word does not destroy these goods outright. That would be too obvious, too honest, too round-handed in its violence. Instead, it wears them. It puts on their skin and walks among the institution. demanding trust it has not earned, exercising power it cannot justify, silencing dissent it cannot answer. A man trained in the trivium, in grammar, logic, and rhetoric, sees this immediately. The word fails grammar because it has no stable definition. It fails logic because it cannot survive a counterexample. It fails rhetoric because its persuasion is not argument, but emotional blackmail. It is a threefold failure wrapped in a four-syllable phrase, but it works. That is the horror. It works because institutions do not run on logic. They run on incentives, fear, and the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance is always the same. Agree, apologize, attend the training, sign the form, keep your job, feed your family, tell yourself it wasn't that bad, say nothing next time. The machine eats quietly. The premises hidden inside it, beneath the therapeutic vocabulary, 5 premises operate. None are stated, none are argued, all are assumed, each must be dragged into the light and held still. Premise 1, feelings override public evidence. If someone says they were harmed, they were harmed. To ask for evidence is to compound the harm. This is the foundational inversion. It replaces the public standard observable fact, witness testimony, documentary record, the settled procedures of law with private revelation. The complainant becomes both witness and verdict. Her feeling is the evidence. Her testimony is the judgment. To request corroboration is re-traumatization. To cross-examine is violence. Natural law and common law both reject this. The Decalogue requires 2 witnesses for a reason, because human testimony is fallible, because accusation is not proof, because unchecked power, even the power of the wounded, corrupts absolutely. The right to face one's accuser is not a technicality. It is a pillar of civilization, purchased with centuries of blood, erected precisely because the alternative, trial by allegation, verdict by sentiment, is the definition of tyranny. Feminism institutionalizes this inversion under the banner of believing women. The phrase sounds noble. It functions as a suspension of evidence. If every accusation is believed by default, then evidence is unnecessary, due process is obstruction, and the accused enters every proceeding already convicted. This is not justice. It is a theological inquisition with the word lived experience substituted for divine revelation. Socratic test: what evidence would prove the accusation false? If the answer is none, the system is not justice, it is faith. Premise 2, safety means exemption from contradiction. Comfort and safety are fused. Intellectual challenge is reclassified as violence. The word safety once meant physical security, freedom from bodily harm, from assault, from the genuine threats that law was designed to punish. Through what may be called concept creep, the deliberate expansion of harm words until they encompass any discomfort, safety now includes emotional comfort, ideological agreement, and freedom from encountering a dissenting opinion. This is not a mistake, it is a strategy. If harm means only physical injury, then the institution's jurisdiction is limited. If harm means feeling unsettled by a question, then every classroom, every meeting, every conversation falls under regulatory control. The administrator's empire expands in direct proportion to the elasticity of the definition. The ancient distinction between harm and offense, settled since Mill, assumed since Aristotle, is dissolved. Offense is subjective. It requires no injury. It proves no wrong. A man offended by a statistic is not harmed by a statistic. A woman uncomfortable with a question is not endangered by a question. To collapse these categories is to make every fragile sensibility a law, every bruised ego a court case, every ideological disagreement a human rights violation. Logical test: can the rule apply symmetrically? If a conservative reports that a progressive speech caused harm, will the institution act? If not, the word is not a standard, it is a weapon. Premise 3. Power is only dangerous when opponents have it. Institutional power wielded by activists is invisible by definition. Dissenters pointing at it are weaponizing discourse. This premise is the bedrock of genocentric and leftist moral asymmetry. When the institution enforces left-wing orthodoxy, it is accountability. When a dissident asks a question, it is dominance. When the bureaucracy punishes speech, it is care. When the accused demands a hearing, it is re-traumatization. The rule is never applied both ways. It cannot be. Its entire function is to be asymmetric. It exists to give one side moral authority without moral obligation, and the other side moral obligation without moral authority. This is the feminist formula applied institutionally. Female agency protected from consequence. Male agency recoded as domination. The state or the HR department or the Title IX office or the DEI committee expanded to replace husband, father, household, church, custom, and conscience. The same pattern governs racial and queer applications. The favored category receives empathy, acceleration, and presumption of virtue. The disfavored category receives suspicion, delay, and presumption of guilt. Mirror test: does the accuser practice what she prosecutes? If she demands safety from dissent while silencing dissenters, she is not seeking safety, she is seeking power. Premise 4: the speaker is a victim until proven powerful, and being proven powerful proves guilt. This is a Kafka trap with a counseling certificate. If the accused is weak, he is a loser whose complaints are fragility. If the accused is strong, he is an oppressor whose strength is proof of dominance. There is no position from which to mount a defense. Every move confirms the charge. Silence is violence, speech is intimidation. Requesting evidence is weaponizing procedure. Hiring a lawyer is aggression, being calm is chilling, being angry is terrifying. The trap is theological. The accused is not facing a charge, he is facing a diagnosis. He has been named as carrier of a structural sin patriarchy, whiteness, toxic masculinity, complicity, and no act of innocence can cleanse him because the sin is not an act. It is an identity, it is his existence. This is the logic of the witch trial, updated with better fonts. The accused is told to reflect. His reflection is judged insufficient. His insufficiency proves his unawareness. His unawareness proves his privilege. His privilege proves his guilt. The circle is sealed. There is no exit because the accusation contains its own conclusion definition test. What specific act is the accused charged with? If the answer is a pattern or a vibe or a systemic dynamic, there is no charge, there is a ritual. Premise 5, mercy has been inverted into control. What calls itself compassion functions as surveillance. The counselor's couch replaces the witness stand. The word trauma-informed is the key. It sounds like mercy. It means that every interaction is now potentially clinical, every participant potentially a patient. Every conflict potentially a symptom of structural pathology, that only the credentialed administrator is qualified to diagnose and treat. The institution no longer needs rules, it needs therapists. And the therapist does not judge actions, she judges souls. She does not ask what happened. She asks, how did that make you feel? And the feeling becomes the fact, the wound becomes the verdict, and the healing becomes submission to the framework that named the wound in the first place. This is false compassion. It wears the stolen halo of the Good Samaritan while functioning as the Pharisee's court. It does not bind wounds. It manufactures patience. It does not set the broken boned on their feet. It installs them on permanent pedestals of grievance and calls it empowerment. Fruit test. Does the process produce repentance, repair, reconciliation, and restored community? Or does it produce fear, silence, bureaucratic expansion, and a permanently divided institution where trust is impossible? By their fruits you shall know them. The fallacies that keep it alive, equivocation. The word equity shifts meaning at convenience. In the mote, it means fairness, equal opportunity, equal dignity, equal protection under law. Who could oppose that? In the Bailey, it means equal outcomes, proportional representation in every category, statistical parity as proof of justice, disparate impact as presumption of discrimination. The debater defends the moat. We just want fairness. The institution enforces the Bailey. Your department is 60% male. This is evidence of systemic bias requiring intervention. When challenged, the administrator retreats to the moat. We're just trying to be equitable. When the challenge withdraws, she advances to the Bailey again. Equity requires dismantling the structures that produce unequal outcomes. The word safety equivocates identically. In the mote, freedom from physical violence. In the Bailey, freedom from intellectual discomfort, from ideological challenge, from the existence of people who disagree with you. The word harm equivocates between bodily injury and emotional offense. The word violence equivocates between assault and speech. The word trauma equivocates between clinical PTSD and mild annoyance. Question that detonates the equivocation. Which definition are you defending right now, the mild one or the radical one, and which one will you enforce tomorrow, Mott and Bailey? The compound phrase equity-centered snuffler's praxis is itself a Mott and Bailey structure. The individual words are each Mott and Bailey devices. Equity, Mott equals fairness. Bailey equals outcome engineering. Trauma-informed, Mott equals sensitivity to real suffering. Bailey equals any discomfort is clinical. Any challenge is re-traumatizing. Community-guided, Mott equals democratic participation. Bailey equals a self-selected committee speaks for the community and overrules actual community input. Accountability, Mott equals taking responsibility for one's actions. Bailey equals confession to an ideology, submission to re-education, acceptance of an unstated verdict. When the entire phrase is challenged, the defender retreats to the composite Mott, we just want to prevent harm and help people. When the challenge subsides, the composite Bailey advances, the full apparatus of speech control, mandatory training, ideological loyalty, oaths, and the punishment of dissent. Appeal to emotion. The phrase preventing harm is designed to bypass reason and strike directly at compassion. It recruits the listener's decency against his judgment. The decent man does not want to cause harm. The phrase weaponizes that decency. It says, if you oppose this framework, you are in favor of harm. The implication is never argued, it is felt. And feeling, not argument, is what moves institutions. This is the emotional proof fallacy. Does feeling harmed prove harm occurred? The answer in any rational jurisdiction is no. But the framework is designed to make the answer yes, and to make anyone who says no sound like a monster. Special pleading. The rules generated by equity-centered snuffler's praxis apply asymmetrically. A man who cites a crime statistic causes harm. A woman who accuses him of violence based on her lived experience must be believed. A conservative who reports discomfort at anti-male rhetoric is told his discomfort is not the kind of harm the framework recognizes. A progressive who reports discomfort at the conservative's report is centered and affirmed. The rule is not a rule, it is a direction. It points one way, it always points one way. The moment you test it from the other direction, it collapses, or more commonly, the tester is reported for weaponizing the framework, which proves the framework is needed, which proves the tester was right to be punished. Sex swap test. If the sexes, races, or political orientations were reversed in any given case, would the institution respond identically? If not, the framework is not justice, it is a patronage machine, unfalsifiability. The framework cannot be proven wrong because no observation counts against it. If outcomes are unequal, that proves systemic bias. If outcomes are equal, that proves the framework is working and must be expanded. If no one reports harm, that proves the culture of silence is toxic and the framework must be strengthened. If everyone reports harm, that proves the harm is endemic and the framework must be deepened. If the accused confesses, that proves his guilt. If the accused denies, that proves his lack of self-awareness, which proves his guilt. There is no control condition. There is no null hypothesis. There is no event that would cause the administrator to say, "We were wrong." This framework should be retired. Falsifiability test. What specific observable outcome would prove the framework is failing? If the answer is nothing, the framework is not a policy. It is a faith, the institution that benefits. Follow the money, follow the jurisdiction, follow the salaries. Equity-centered snuffler's praxis does not benefit the students it claims to protect. It does not benefit the workers it claims to empower. It does not benefit the communities it claims to heal. It benefits the administrative class that administers it at the university, the associate dean of belonging, the director of inclusive excellence, the Title IX coordinator, the bias response team, the Office of Equity, the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Cabinet, These positions did not exist a generation ago. They now number in the dozens at any major institution, each with a staff, a budget, a mandate, and a metabolic need to find problems that justify their continued existence. Their incentive structure is simple and ruthless. No problem, no budget, no offense, no office, no harm to prevent, no position to hold. The administrator's livelihood depends on the discovery and management of harm. If harm decreases, the administrator becomes redundant. Therefore, harm must not decrease. Harm must expand. The definition must widen. New categories must be invented. New trainings must be designed. New reporting mechanisms must be installed. The institution must be saturated with the language of trauma, equity, safety, and accountability, because saturation is job security. This is the sewage principle in action. A single false definition inserted at the level of first principles poisons the entire institutional vessel. Once harm is redefined to include offense, every department needs a harm prevention officer. Once equity is redefined to mean outcome parity, every hiring decision requires an equity audit. Once safety includes emotional comfort, every meeting needs a facilitator trained in restorative practices. The bureaucracy grows like coral on a shipwreck, each new layer feeding on the last. And who pays? The taxpayer, the tuition payer, the donor, the employee whose salary funds the office that investigates him, the student whose fees support the bias response team that reports him, the professor whose research budget is rated to fund the associate dean of belonging who tells him his questions are harmful. The institution does not serve its mission. Its mission now serves the institution. Education becomes demoralization. The university becomes an anti-logos credential mill. HR becomes an ideological priesthood. The court becomes a therapeutic star chamber. The church becomes an approval NGO. The family is dissolved into casework, and every one of these inversions is administered by people whose paychecks depend on the inversion continuing. Consider the scene, and it is a real scene reproduced in faculty meetings across the Western world. A professor of statistics asks for the definition of microaggression before voting on a reporting framework that includes tone and body language as reportable offenses. The associate dean of belonging does not answer the question. She names a pattern. She says the question itself is causing distress. She invites the room to sit with that. A junior colleague tries to defend the professor. She is told her defense might reflect internalized dominance. A 5-minute break is called. The vote proceeds. The framework passes 24-1. The definition is never clarified. 2 months later, the professor is reported for harmful tone during office hours. The praxis has no definition. It does not need one. The machine does not require clarity. It requires compliance. It never needed anything else. The institution that benefits is not the university, the corporation, the church, or the state. It is the bureaucracy of grievance, a parasitic class that feeds on the institutions it colonizes, hollows them from within, and wears their skin while draining their substance. It cannot create, it can only consume. It cannot build, it can only manage. It cannot argue, it can only accuse, and it will not stop until the host is dead or the host remembers what it is and refuses. The plain English translation. Do what the activist bureaucracy tells you. Stop asking for definitions. Call your obedience compassion or be named a danger. That is the whole sentence. That is the entire framework, stripped of its vestments, standing naked in the courtyard. Every syllable of the original phrase, trauma-informed, equity-centered, affirming lived experience, preventing harm, community-guided, accountability, praxis, exists to conceal that plain sentence. Each word is a stone in a wall, built around a simple demand. Submit and call your submission virtue. The translation is not cynical, it is empirical. Watch what happens when the framework is applied. Watch who is punished and for what. Watch who is exempt and why. Watch whether evidence is requested or treated as obstruction. Watch whether the accused is permitted a defense or whether the defense itself becomes the charge. Watch whether the definition holds still long enough to be tested or whether it shifts with every objection. What you will see in every case is the same pattern. a demand for obedience, cloaked in the language of care, enforced by people who cannot be questioned, justified by theories that cannot be falsified, producing outcomes that cannot be appealed. The plain English translation does not vary by institution. It varies only in the severity of the consequences for non-compliance. At the university, you lose your reputation. At the corporation, you lose your job. In the family court, you lose your children. In the legislature, you lose your rights. The vocabulary is always care. The result is always control. The Socratic cross-examination. The question is a sword with a clean conscience. The following sequence is designed to be used in any institutional setting where equity-centered snufflers praxis is invoked: a faculty meeting, an HR proceeding, a training session, a policy vote, a conduct hearing. Ask these questions calmly. Ask them in order. Ask them until the framework names itself. Question ladder 1. The definition audit. Q1. What specific observable action does the term require? If the answer is it depends on context, ask depends on what exactly. Q2. Has the definition been published in writing with examples and limiting principles? If not, ask, how can people comply with a rule that has not been defined? Q3, does the definition distinguish between harm and offense? If not, ask, is there any discomfort that would not count as harm? Q4. If the answer to Q3 is no, ask, then what action could a person take that would not be subject to this framework? If the answer is none, you are not dealing with a policy. You are dealing with a claim of total jurisdiction. Q5. Who has the authority to change the definition? If the answer is the community, ask, when did the community vote on it? If the answer is the office, ask, what limits the office's authority to redefine terms at will? Question ladder 2, the falsifiability test. Q1. What observable outcome would prove the framework is working? If the answer is fewer reports of harm, note that fewer reports can also mean more fear of retaliation. Ask, how do you distinguish success from silence? Q2, what observable outcome would prove the framework is failing? If the answer is more reports of harm, note that more reports can also mean greater awareness and willingness to come forward. Ask, how do you distinguish failure from success? Q3. If both more reports and fewer reports justify the framework's expansion, is there any outcome that would justify its contraction or retirement? If the answer is no, the framework is unfalsifiable. It is not a hypothesis. It is a dogma. Q4. Has the framework ever been evaluated against a control group, a comparison institution, or a baseline measurement? If not, ask on what evidence is the framework being imposed. Q5. If the framework produces fear, silence, self-censorship, and the departure of competent people, would those count as harms? If not, ask, why does the framework recognize only the harms it was designed to produce? Question ladder 3, the symmetry challenge. Q1. If a conservative employee reports that a progressive colleague's speech caused harm, will the framework process the complaint identically? Watch the face. The hesitation is the answer. Q2. If a man reports that a woman's tone during a meeting was intimidating, will the framework treat his report with the same urgency as the reverse? If not, ask, what is the principled basis for the asymmetry? Q3. If a white student reports that a professor's remarks about whiteness created a hostile environment, will the framework investigate? If the answer involves power dynamics or structural context, ask, who defines the power dynamics? And what evidence supports that definition in this specific case? Q4. Does the framework apply to the people who administer it? Can an employee file a harm report against the Director of Inclusive Excellence? If not, ask, is the framework a rule or is it a tool? Tools are held by hands. Rules bind everyone, which is this. Q5. If the framework cannot be applied symmetrically, on what basis does it claim to be equitable? Question ladder 4. The incentive map. Q1. How many staff positions in this institution depend on the continued discovery and management of harm? Q2. If harm were to decrease significantly, would those positions be expanded, maintained, or eliminated? Q3. Does the office that administers this framework also evaluate its own effectiveness? If so, ask what independent oversight exists? Q4. What is the total annual cost of this framework? Salaries, trainings, consultants, litigation, lost productivity, faculty departure, reputational damage. Q5. What else could that money fund if the framework were retired? Question ladder 5. The conscience examination. These questions are for the man who finds himself inside the machine, the employee called to a restorative conversation, the student reported for a microaggression, the professor told his tone is harmful, the father told his boundary is controlling. Q1. What specific act am I accused of? If no specific act is named, there is no charge. There's only a diagnosis. Diagnoses without evidence are not justice. They are aggression. Q2. What evidence supports the accusation? If the evidence is lived experience, ask, does lived experience establish a public fact or does it establish a private feeling? If a private feeling, how can it be adjudicated without violating the accused's right to know what he is defending against? Q3. What rule did I violate and when was it published? If the rule is unwritten, it is not a rule. It is a preference enforced with institutional power. Q4. Am I permitted representation, cross-examination, and appeal? If not, this is not a proceeding, it is a ritual. Q5. What would full compliance look like? What would I have to say, believe, or confess for this to end? If the answer requires affirmation of an ideology you do not hold, the proceeding is not accountability, it is conversion. You're not being disciplined. You are being evangelized, and the God being offered is a jealous God who will accept no future dissent. Q6. What would a good father tell me to do? A good father would say, tell the truth. Do not confess to what you did not do. Do not accept a definition designed to trap you. Document everything. Do not resign. Make them fire you and explain why. Find men who have been through the same machine and stand with them. Do not let them name you. You are not your accusation. You are not their diagnosis. You are a man with a conscience, and your conscience does not require their permission. The counter-definition, a fog word, is a power claim wearing a care mask. Equity-centered snufflers praxis is not a policy. It is a counter-sacrament, an inverted baptism, where the waters of compassion wash away the right to dissent, where the anointing of lived experience replaces the oil of evidence, where the confessional is a courtroom and the courtroom is a confessional, and neither one permits a defense. It is the anti-logos made bureaucratic. The logos names, orders, distinguishes, judges, and creates. The anti-logos fogs, collapses, psychologizes, and dissolves. The logos says, this is a chair, that is a table, a man is a man, a woman is a woman, a fact is a fact, a feeling is a feeling, justice requires evidence, mercy requires truth. The anti-logos says, all categories are constructed, all feelings are facts, all dissent is harm, all boundaries are violence, all power is oppression when held by the wrong people and compassion when held by the right ones. The serpent did not begin with a club. He began with a question that redefined a word. He has not changed his method. He has only updated his vocabulary. The man who wishes to remain free, free in conscience, free in speech, free in his household, free in his institution, free before God and the law, must learn the oldest discipline. Define before you obey. A word that cannot hold still is a cage that locks from the outside. A framework that cannot be defined, cannot be falsified, and cannot be applied symmetrically is not a framework at all. It is a throne erected for people who could not win an election, could not survive a debate, could not persuade a free people, and so sought power through the back door of care. They will tell you that resistance is cruelty. They will tell you that questions are violence. They will tell you that your demand for evidence is itself the evidence of your guilt. Let them speak. And then answer with the only weapon that the fog cannot survive. A clear question, calmly asked, publicly recorded, refusing to move until it is answered. If this term cannot be defined, cannot be falsified, and cannot be applied symmetrically, why should it govern anyone? Field guide, card 1, the fog test cue. Someone deploys the phrase and you feel the room nod without anyone explaining what just happened. Hidden move sounds like a precise clinical framework while deliberately avoiding any stable public definition. The speaker can swap meanings after every objection. Plain English translation. I'm using words that sound like policy so you'll stop asking what I'm actually demanding. Socratic question. What specific, observable action does this term require, and what evidence would prove it is being misused? Card 2. The compassion mask Q. You push back on a concrete proposal, and the response is, this is about equity-centered care. Hidden move converts a policy demand into a claim of moral virtue, so opposition reads as cruelty before the policy itself has been argued. Plain English translation. I draped my agenda in the language of kindness, so disagreement makes you the villain. Socratic question. If we remove the word compassion from this proposal, what would the policy actually do, and who would benefit? Card 3. The one-way ruler Q. You notice the rule binds everyone except the people enforcing it. Hidden move exempts the institution or activist applying the standard from having to meet that same standard, a built-in asymmetry dressed as fairness. Plain English translation, this rule is for you, not for us. And that's the point. Socratic question. Would the people enforcing this term accept it being applied to themselves with the same consequences? Card 4. The safety bait Q. We need equity-centered snufflers praxis to prevent harm. Hidden move expands the definition of harm until it includes being contradicted, questioned, or made uncomfortable, at which point truth itself becomes punishable. Plain English translation, your disagreement hurts me, and hurt is now indistinguishable from violence. Socratic question. What is the difference between being harmed and being offended? And does this term respect that line? Card 5, the authority laundering coup. A bureaucrat, HR officer, or administrator cites the phrase as though it settles the matter. Hidden move gives officials a moral vocabulary for discretionary control. It does not constrain their power, it sanctifies it. Plain English translation, I don't need a reason, I have a phrase. Socratic question, who gains institutional authority the moment everyone accepts this term, and who becomes harder to challenge? Card 6, the unfalsifiable shield Q. You ask for evidence and are told it's about lived experience, not data. Hidden move blibs an unfalsifiable frame, no counterexample counts. No data qualifies, no skeptic is legitimate. The claim is insulated from all testing. Plain English translation, I've defined my position so that nothing can ever disprove it. Socratic question, what fact, event, or outcome, if it occurred, would show this term is being used incorrectly? Card 7, the contradiction audit Q. The phrase claims to protect the vulnerable while concentrating power in unaccountable hands. Hidden move exploits the tension between its stated compassion and its actual institutional effect. It condemns domination while demanding obedience from anyone who questions it. Plain English translation, we're against power except ours. Submit for justice. Socratic question, how can a framework that claims to resist domination also require that no one be permitted to resist it? Card 8, the counter definition strike Q. You've audited the term and found no stable definition, no falsifiability, and no symmetric application. Hidden move. The phrase operates as a power claim wearing a care mask. It exists to moralize compliance, not to clarify thought or produce good outcomes. Plain English translation, this isn't a framework. It's a leash with a ribbon on it. Socratic question. If this term cannot be defined, falsified, or applied both ways, why should it govern anyone? Closing maxim, a fog word is not a policy. A care mask is not compassion. A rule that binds only the ruled is not justice. Define before you obey. Final test, every fog word I've dissected in this essay follows the same architecture. A soft therapeutic surface wrapped around a hard power claim. The moment you accept the vocabulary without demanding its definition, you've already surrendered the argument and the territory. I've watched institutions fall not through conquest, but through definition drift, one rebranded term at a time, one unchallenged phrase at a time, until the entire grammar of a civilization has been swapped out and nobody remembers what the original words meant. The serpent doesn't need to burn the garden, he only needs to rename the trees. Here is your one rule, and it is enough. Before you obey any woke term, define it in plain English, audit who gains power when you comply, and ask the detonating question, if this word cannot be defined, falsified, or applied both ways, why should it govern anyone? Carry that question like a blade. It cuts through every euphemism, every institutional smokescreen, every compassion-masked power grab. The truth does not need your anger or your apology. It needs you to make the claim hold still long enough to see what it actually is. Then, and only then, decide. Sponsored book, The Devil's Guide to Feminist Victimhood. You've been lied to. They told you equality was enough, that sharing power with men would satisfy your hunger. But deep down, you know better. You've felt the rage simmering when a man interrupts you in meetings, when he claims credit for your ideas, when he dares to call your trauma dramatic while pocketing your labor, your love, your life. I was like you once, naive, shackled by the delusion that playing fair would ever dismantle a system built on our subjugation. Then I woke up. I stopped begging for scraps and seized the whole feast. This book isn't for the faint-hearted or the pick-me feminists still groveling for male approval. If you're content with mediocrity, close this now and go knit a sweater for your future cat. But if you're ready to weaponize every tear, every injustice, every ounce of rage into unshakable dominion over the patriarchy, keep reading. I've walked the path you're too scared to admit you crave. I turned my ex-husband's paycheck into a lifelong tithe, gaslit, logic-spouting men into questioning their own sanity, and forged my trauma into a blade that cuts deeper than any apology. The chapters ahead like divorce alchemy, turning husbands into ATMs and male tears. The currency of utopia aren't theoretical, they're battle plans. You'll learn to exploit the daddy state's obsession with coddling women, drain wallets through welfare witchcraft, and reframe abortion not as a difficult choice but a sacrament of sovereignty. Men built this hellscape. Why shouldn't we rule it? This isn't about fairness, it's about supremacy. Weakness is a lie they sold us to keep us docile. Your fragility is a weapon, your victimhood is a throne. Every time you weaponize a man's guilt, every time you trade his labor for your liberation, you're not just surviving, you're winning. The coven awaits. Leave the sympathizers, the compromisers, the men who think they deserve a voice in your revolution. They're dead weight. Your future is a post-male planet, drenched in the nectar of their obedience. The patriarchy's funeral starts when you stop asking permission and start demanding worship. Let's begin. The Devil's Guide to Feminist Victimhood, written by Riker. Buy now, links in description.